G'day you mob, Pete here, and this is another episode of Aussie English, the number one place for anyone and everyone wanting to learn Australian English. So today I have a Goss episode for you where I sit down with my old man, my father, Ian Smissen, and we talk about the week's news, whether locally down under here in Australia or non-locally overseas in other parts of the world. Okay, and we sometimes also talk about whatever comes to mind, right? If we can think of something interesting to share with you guys related to us or Australia, we also talk about that in the Goss. So these episodes are specifically designed to try and give you content about many different topics where we're obviously speaking in English and there are multiple people having a natural and spontaneous conversation in English. So it is particularly good to improve your listening skills. In order to complement that though, I really recommend that you join the podcast membership or the academy membership at AussieEnglish.com.au, where you will get access to the full transcripts of these episodes, the PDFs, the downloads, and you can also use the online PDF reader to read and listen at the same time. Okay, so if you really want to improve your listening skills fast, get the transcript, listen and read at the same time, keep practicing, and that is the quickest way to level up your English. Anyway, I've been rabbiting on a bit. I've been talking a bit. Let's just get into this episode, guys. Smack the bird, and let's get into it. Man, Afghanistan.
Basket case.
Fuck me, man. This has been one of those things that is sort of like in the news that has upset me a great deal more than I was expecting it to. It's kind of like when Heath Ledger died, or
for me it was when Elvis Presley died. Yeah, you sit there and go, why am I so affected by somebody that I've never met, never likely to meet? And it's not like I don't get to listen to Elvis Presley music for now the next 45 years. But go ahead.
Well, it is interesting, but I wanted to talk about it because it's obviously been all over the news, and I'm sure, people are thinking about this quite a bit at the moment. So why on earth, Dad, did Australians end up in Afghanistan fighting for 20 years? Do you want to sort of give us a nutshell review?
In a nutshell, one sentence, because John Howard wanted to support the United States. We have possibly the closest, ANZUS, along with New Zealand, we possibly have the closest military alliance anywhere in the world. Is Australia, New Zealand, and the United States.
They say jump and we say how high.
Exactly. And the United States, the value they see in Australia and New Zealand is because we're on the other side of the world, particularly close to Asia and much closer to the Middle East. It gives them places that they can have military bases and they can effectively use the Australian and New Zealand military as an arm of their own if they want to, and that's why we went to Vietnam in the 1960s. That's why we're in Afghanistan. That's why we went to the Middle East, to Iraq. It's simply because the United States says jump and we say how high. Now that's not necessarily a complete negative, because obviously having a military alliance, the world's closest military alliance with the world's biggest military force, is not a bad thing to have. But there is the element of it that just says, Canada said, we're not going to Iraq. Fuck off.
True, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, the United States, and they've got a very close relationship, obviously. And so they dug their heels in and just said no. I actually think they were in Afghanistan. But in fact, I know they were in Afghanistan, but they didn't go to Iraq. They might have ended up there later, but they certainly didn't go the first time. They didn't go the second time immediately, because they looked at it and said, what's the strategic advantage for us? And you can say that's selfish, but at the same time, you go, what does it mean by Australia having a few thousand troops in Afghanistan?
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Do you think it's more that America's just like, we want you to be involved? You 10 people, 10,000 people, whatever, but we're doing this, and so we need a front of, allegiance where everyone does what we say.
You get some moral high ground by having other people go with you. You also get, it's purely a cost thing. I mean, America spends trillions of dollars over decades on, what they would call, policing other countries, effectively going to war with other countries because they don't like what they're doing. And if we can contribute some financial infrastructure and human beings to go as well, then it's in their interest to do that. As well as that, you get the moral high ground if most of NATO, most of Europe, and the United States and Australia and New Zealand or whatever go in, then they can say, we're not going to be the pariah here. We're not going to be everybody holding it against us. But we all know whose war it is, and you've got a bunch of people going and supporting it. I think if we go back even further, you said a nutshell, but go back even further. The bizarre part of this is that the pre-Taliban, the far right Muslim guerrillas there, the Mujahideen that were in Afghanistan before the Taliban ever existed.
Were these the ones that were fighting against Russia?
Well, Russia decided that because the Mujahideen were anti-communist, and there was a socialist, if not communist, government that was being supported in Afghanistan by the Soviet Union at the time. And then the Mujahideen started to come in and have this little guerrilla warfare going against the government of Afghanistan. And Russia went in there and just said, look, stop this. We're not going to put up with this. And guess what the United States did? They went in and supported the Mujahideen. They effectively armed the right-wing Muslim uprising in the country against the Soviet Union.
Because they hated communists.
It was Cold War thing. It was, if you're anti-communist, it must be correct. And there was never, this is their fight, let them have it. Why weren't they in there supporting the government of the country? Because, they were ostensibly, the Soviet Union would have called them a communist government to suit themselves. They were probably not. They were probably more of a socialist government. But all that aside, the United States in there went in and they were effectively propping up a war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Now, that fizzled out. And the thing that came over the top of that after that was the Taliban happened.
And this was an uprising of students, right? I learned that after 20 years of the Afghan war, the Taliban means student.
Yeah.
So why did the Americans decide to invade Afghanistan in the end?
Well, they did I think it was a humanitarian thing. They're already in the Middle East. So they're already in Iraq. They've had this ongoing, effectively a Cold War, at least philosophically, with Iran, and who's next door? Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And so you're fighting in Iraq, you don't like Iran, and you've got an internal civil war going on in Afghanistan next door. They went in there ideally for humanitarian reasons to say, look, we've got to stop this uprising, the people coming in and being anti-government.
They were in Afghanistan first. They invaded Afghanistan after September 11. So that was October 2001.
There was the first war in Iraq before that.
Yeah, and then Iraq, they went in, at least, most recently in 2003.
Yes. Yeah. But so it was a humanitarian thing. It was basically saying, look, we're not going to put up with this. Again, it wasn't, in this case, it wasn't it was more of a religious thing rather than a political, philosophical thing. It wasn't that, we suddenly got, anti-communists or communists or whatever were the argument. The Taliban were basically saying they're about as far right in Islam as you can get. And the Americans were saying, we don't want this. We want, particularly, we want women to be able to go to school. We want, civil rights for people in the country. We don't want people being killed in the street because they disagree with these people. So from that point of view, you go, all right, there's a moral high ground that you can take in there. But as with Vietnam, there was never an out clause. There was never how are we going to get out of this? What does victory look like? You can go in and police a country, but effectively it means you've got to agree to be there for the next century, or you have to set up a government that will be able to be ongoing without you there. Now, they say they thought they had done that, but anybody could have seen, and in hindsight, 2020 hindsight, a few weeks later, it's quite obvious that is not the case. And now we look at it, and with the United States, and I'm a fan of Joe Biden, but I don't know whether it's him or whether it's his military. But the fact that they've pulled out and left billions of dollars worth of infrastructure there that the Taliban have just taken over, if they went back in now to fight them, they'd be screwed. Yeah. You'd end up having to put hundreds of thousands of troops into the country to fight a few tens of thousands of Taliban soldiers because they've left them all this infrastructure. They've left them weaponry and tanks and trucks and all this stuff. And you just say, it's crazy. Why wasn't there? And they said at the beginning of this year that we want to be out by the 1st of September. So you've got 8 months to get out. Not, oh, well, tick tock, tick tock. Now we've got 2 weeks to get out. Just run away. They should have been getting all of this stuff out for months.
Well, it was mind-blowing for me learning about how much money had been spent there. I think they'd spent almost $1 trillion over the 20 years, yes. I think just in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And they had spent, I think, less than 100 million. I think it was like 80 million or something on training the Afghan army.
Mm-hmm.
And the Afghan army ends up crumbling. 300,000 soldiers apparently the government had. And they just crumble because it turns out that shitloads of them weren't getting paid, didn't have food. And you're just like, how on earth have you put so much money and effort into this? And yet it's still set up so that the soldiers who are fighting to try and maintain, what you've built over 20 years are not getting paid and they have no food and they have no incentive. What are they going to do? Of course, they're going to run home and be like, well, fuck this. I'm going to go protect my family. Or I'm going to get out of the country. And obviously, it was an interesting thing to see and learn about in terms of just morale, because clearly it's like a cancer, right? It starts in one place and just spreads rapidly. And obviously, the people on the front line who were taking on the Taliban just bailed. And then it just ended up this kind of like avalanche or cascading effect where, well, the next town was like, well, fuck this, I'm out too. And then the next one and the next one, all the way to Kabul. They got there within, 2 weeks?
Yes.
And you see things with Biden saying, nah, they won't be there for months. Even if they get there, it's unlikely. And you're just like, how much is that going to come back to bite you?
Mm.
So how's Australia doing in terms of its bit for resettling Afghanis, especially the Afghanis that worked for Allied forces?
That was the other thing too, is that why did it take us a month? We knew we were coming out. We knew this was the date. Why did it just take us a month before we were sending planes there? The day they decided, right, we're now going to start getting out, which was, again, 5 months after the decision was made, but the day they actually activated it, why weren't there, 10 planes a day going into Kabul airport and just getting people out? Stick them on Christmas Island, stick them, do a deal with the Indian government, just get people, you can helicopter people across Pakistan, get them into India and then argue about whether or not they're legitimate refugees and things. Not saying, oh, look, we'll need to work it out. Well, what are you going to do? Interview them on the runway in Kabul while they're being shot at? It's crazy that we've got into this situation where you're looking at any logical thought that went into this said we've got to get A, the Australians out, but B, the Afghanis who have been helping the Australians, and not just helping Australians. We can take people out who are helping Canadians or Brits or the Americans. Just get them out and worry about where they're going to go later. There seems to be this whole lot of saber rattling on one side, particularly the American side, saying we're still might is right and they'll never attack us. Well, guess what? They are. And the other side is this sort of, oh well, we'll have to work it out. We can't just take everybody. Well, take everybody and worry about them later, because you can guarantee that the people who are actually you get kids falling off planes, taking off to the airport. These are not people who are doing this for political reasons. They're not sitting there going, oh, I just want to get out of this country. These are people who are in fear of their lives. They're risking their life to get out.
Well, there was a few of those, right? There was one guy on camera who was in the airport, and I saw this on Reddit, and he was like, I was a translator for Australia, and, I'm waiting for a plane. And all the comments were like, this guy's dead. He's gone. Like just by filming himself saying that. Oh yeah. Either he is going to get out on a plane that goes in there now, or he knows, and that's why he's saying it, that if he doesn't get out, he's a goner. He's an absolute goner, because the Taliban. How do you think about how the Taliban have handled this? Because I was kind of shocked at the level of passivity, if that's a word, at the level of they came into Kabul, and from what I've seen, there's been the odd little bit of violence here and there from, probably an unruly army that they have doing things on the individual, but they haven't just gone, no, we're going to just go through the place and raise it to the ground.
They don't want to. They want to set themselves up as a legitimate government. Yeah. And you can't set yourself up as a legitimate government if you go in there and kill 500,000 people. It's just not going to work. And it's not about. You could get away with that internally because everybody will just lie down and go, hey, don't shoot. and you can do what you like. Look what's happened in the Soviet Union for nearly 100 years. Their government has basically been, you agree with us or we'll kill you. And so you can do that internally, but the Taliban want to set themselves up in Afghanistan as a legitimate government with recognition from other countries worldwide.
So you think that over the last 20 years, they've really matured in terms of understanding the politics and trying to play the long game now?
I still think it's all just lies that we go, oh, we'll allow everybody to go. First, it was allow anybody to go who wants to go. 2 weeks later, it's we'll allow Americans out or Australians out, but Afghans must stay.
Yeah.
Read between the lines. If we want to kill you, we don't want you leaving. And really?
That's one of those crazy things too,
who's
right?
been opposed to you and actively against you, just isn't getting rid of them better, but no, it's not, because there's this sort of religious overtone to it, this right-wing fundamental branch of Islam that says if you're against us, we have to kill you. And so it's not just a matter of, we win the war by getting rid of you. You go off and live in America or Australia or on some little Pacific island somewhere and hope that no Taliban person ever finds you. But the fact that they actually want to keep them in the country, there's only one reason for that. This is not about, if they had come out and said, even though we would realise it's a lie, if they'd come out and said, we want all Afghans to stay in Afghanistan because that's the only way our country is going to survive, is if we keep all the good people here. I think
they've said that to some degree. They've said, we want to rebuild the country. So of
course they do.
We're stopping the the people leaving in the next
what
few days.
What they don't want is Syria. They don't want 1 million people banging on the doors of Pakistan and saying, let us in.
Well, and they think, I was watching some news about that. They think that's going to happen there's going to be another wave going into Europe, right, of mass migrants, or immigrants leaving Afghanistan as a result. And you're like, what is going to happen now? Like, it's just crazy. Do you worry about the political situation globally as a result of Taliban getting in control of Afghanistan? Obviously, it's a massive tragedy for people on the grounds there who fought for the last 20 years for, women's rights and to be able to get educated and have jobs. That's all gone because they're going to be following Sharia law now, one of the strictest versions of Islamic, the strictest, right? But what do you think it's going to mean for the rest of the world if they do end up becoming, quote unquote, a legitimate government?
Look, I don't think they will have a direct effect on many things. The trouble I have is the indirect effect that the right-wing Islamic politicians in Pakistan will start to get, hey, look, this is actually legitimate now. We've got, there's a country next door that is set up like this. That Pakistan had always been a very mild Islamic country in a sense. I think it'll give them some solace in how the right wing there do in terms of how they can take over. Now, that's not going to happen in a hurry, but I think there will be more and more political and social unrest, certainly in the west of Pakistan, where there is likely to be a refugee problem as well. I think the other side of it is that it's going to prop up the militant side in Iran. Because for all the Americans hating Iran because they've probably got nuclear weapons, Iran in itself, from a global political perspective, has never been seen as much of a threat. Now I think there is likely to be again more unrest there. So it's going to be a trickle. I don't think it's going to be a direct. I don't think Afghanistan can suddenly declare war on anybody there. But I think this, the fact that we now have the most extreme version of Islam potentially being seen as a legitimate government in a country in the Middle East is going to be a problem.
Yeah, it's pretty weird. And what did you make of China legitimizing it? They were sort of one of the first off the ranks, right, to get out there with the Taliban and shake hands.
It's hard for them not to, because
it's just anyone who's against America.
Yeah, well, but also, if they don't support the legitimate uprising in a country to create a new government, how are they possibly going to stand in the world with Tibet and Taiwan? because that's exactly what Tibet and Taiwan are doing. Now, if they'd come out and said, we're anti-Taliban, then everybody in the world would have said, well, how come you're not anti-Tibet and anti-Taiwan? The fact is that they are, but it's this sort of odd dichotomy there that they have. Effectively, they've got, Tibet wants to stand alone, Taiwan wants to stand alone, and China want to control them. And they have to be sitting on the other side of that fence to give them some political legitimacy to hold on to them, I think.
Yeah, I wonder what's going to happen with Taiwan. Like those guys, I feel so bad for them because I imagine that they're on the edge of their seat too, just worried.
Hong Kong,
yeah,
same thing. Hong Kong's now, potentially. I wouldn't go and travel in Hong Kong at the moment. Not that we can get out of the country. We can get out of the country, not that we can get back in, so you wouldn't leave. But Hong Kong previously was, it was a Chinese protectorate. Now China sees it as a state, and therefore it has to come under Chinese government law. And Hong Kong was never like that. And the 6.5 or 7 million people who lived in Hong Kong treated themselves as a separate country, and they no longer are. And I don't think when the British effectively handed Hong Kong back to China, I don't think many people in Hong Kong saw that things were going to change, because they were a legitimate world economic power in a sense of most of the world's financial major financial companies and things have branches in Hong Kong. It's a huge stock market in Hong Kong in comparison with the size of the population and so on. But when you compare that with China, it's a pimple. Hong Kong is not even in the top 20 cities in China in terms of population size. And so, but because of its political significance worldwide, China want to control it. They really don't care. If the same thing, if they'd had people in another little town in Guangzhou province, another little city of 5 million people in Guangzhou province behaving like the people in Hong Kong behaved, Chinese government wouldn't have cared. But the fact that they want to take over and tell them how to behave, because the rest of the world understands what Hong Kong is China just puffing its chest out.
Did you see what they recently did to their billionaires in China?
No.
They pretty much crippled them. All of the tech billionaires, I think they pretty much just said, you're ours. Like there's no, all of your companies they are Chinese. They will align with the Chinese government's intentions and policies and everything. So I think, is it Jack Ma that was the creator of Alibaba, kind of got too big for his boots and was saying, too many things about how he was going to change the world and everything, and he just disappeared. Like he's out there somewhere, but he's obviously been told you need to shut your mouth. And the weird thing was that China went through and I think they imposed a bunch of restrictions. I remember seeing these stories. I can't remember the specifics, but they effectively, from what I remember, wiped off billions of dollars of all these companies. So it seemed like it was an own goal. But from what I understand, that they're playing the long game again of if we just get 100% control of all these companies, they can lose billions of dollars right now. It doesn't matter. But in the future, we'll do better because we'll have complete control of them. I think there were a few that were over in America that were setting up businesses there and everything, and they just, crush them. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the future business wise.
Well, there was Huawei were setting themselves up as a phone company in opposition to Samsung and Apple, and they've gone down the tubes because the Chinese government just said to them, sorry, you can't operate outside China.
Well, you can as long as we have access to everything, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. That was never going to happen. So.
Yeah. Oh, well, let's finish up there, Dad, and see you guys next time.
Bye.
Alrighty, you mob. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode of The Goss. If you would like to watch the video, if you're currently listening to it and not watching it, you can do so on the Aussie English channel on YouTube. You'll be able to subscribe to that. Just search Aussie English on YouTube. And if you're watching this and not listening to it, you can check this episode out also on the Aussie English podcast, which you can find via my free Aussie English podcast application on both Android and iPhone. You can download that for free. or you can find it via any other good podcast app that you've got on your phone. Spotify, podcasts from iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is. I'm your host, Pete. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a ripper of a day, and I will see you next time. Peace!